In Siri. We are recording. My name is Marcia Shields. I'm a customer success manager here at Gimmal. Our mission for these education style sessions is really to assist you in addressing business problems and to demonstrate how Gimmal can provide effective solutions. Our aim is for you to leave with a practical and applicable path to address your business needs. Today, we're going to be talking through about mitigating legal and compliance risks by identifying sensitive data and rot. For those new to this topic, sensitive data can include things in content like PCI and PII, PHI information, which really translates to credit cards, social security numbers, social insurance numbers, driver's license, or a variety of health information. ROT, which is really shortened for redundant, obsolete, and trivial, is data that's been really left largely unmanaged. And a lot of our customers find this poses organizational concerns. Could be things ranging from storage costs and security risks to compliance issues and operational inefficiencies. With me today is my colleague, Jeff Tuish. He's one of our sales engineers here. He's going to be your subject matter expert, and we'll be using our Gimmal Discover solution to demonstrate. Our demonstration for these sessions, this as well as any others going forward, they're going to be no longer than 15 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. Please feel free to post questions during Jeff's demonstration in the chat, and we will address them right after the demo. As mentioned earlier, you heard the product demo will be recorded and shared after this event. Jeff, that's all I have. I'm going to pass it over to you for now.
Great. Thanks, Marcia. Okay, as Marcia said, my name is Jeff Tuish. I'm a sales engineer here at Gimmal, and we're going to be talking about sensitive data and ROT. So if we could get this share done so I can share my screen. There we go. Thank you. And you should be seeing my screen right about now that has a big pie chart in the middle. Thank you, Marcia, for confirming. Okay, so we're going to talk about ROT and sensitive data, and why are those two associated? So if you're going through a ROT analysis remediation process, just because I'm a very black and white person, but just because you have a date or an age of files or emails, whatever you are processing, that are older than that time frame doesn't mean that they are candidates for deletion, because there could be data out there, as Marcia was talking about, that is sensitive data, not only from a PII, personal identifiable information kind of view, but also from a legal one, or maybe there is a legal hold going on, a litigation case at the company, what have you. So you need to make sure that you are protecting the data that needs to exist past the ROT termination date. So what you're looking at right now is, this is the pie chart of classified files. So during this demonstration, I'll be talking about Windows file shares. And as Marcia said, I'm using our Gimmal Discover product. Keep in mind, this whole methodology can also be applied to any other data source, unstructured data. So OneDrive, an email, SharePoint, what have you. But I'll be focusing on Windows file shares today. So what I'm doing on this first one here is we went through and classified some Gimmal test data based upon some labels customized labels that I created. And you're going to see those four here. And if I hover over any one of these pie charts, you're going to see the number of files that were applied that label. And what this is doing for us is I can go out and find data, apply a label to it, and make sure that this data possibly is excluded from our ROT processing. So why would I want to do that? Once again, if this is contractual data or anything that is part of a legal hold case, we want to make sure ROT remediation does not happen on that data. So as I said, these labels are fully customizable, but we also have the ability to go out and say, how do I identify this data? That's the key here. So with the different data sources, they all have different metadata that we can use. Email has subject and sender, recipients, what have you. File shares probably have the least amount of metadata available to it, but there's still an extensive list that you can use to your benefit to be able to look at this data and decide what should be labeled and what should not, and what label should be applied. So for instance, if I look at the metadata for a Windows file share, we have things such as age. So you could use the age of a file, its last modified date, its creation date, its last access date, to be able to determine what is rot and what is not. You could also use attributes such as archive or system-based file, or we could also use the date. Any one of those three same dates I mentioned about with age could also be used. We could do the extension of the file name, the folder name, the owner. Any of these string or text checks that I'm talking about here, like file name or extension, that comes with a list of operators that you can also use. So it's not a very totally binary check. It could be something that's truly equal to a particular extension, or it could be not equal to that, begins or ends with. It could contain or not contain. It could be a like, which is a pattern match. So use that to your benefit as leverage to be able to interrogate this data to make those decisions on the labels. That's the metadata. Now, if you get down to the content of the file or the message, that's probably what you're going to be doing most likely. Now, you could use the other decision points as a basis for qualifying a file as being a sensitive data candidate or a label classification candidate. But the content is probably what you're really going to focus on to be able to get you to the point of knowing exactly what's inside that file. So what you can do is you can specify the criteria you want, the metadata or content, specify your matching criteria on that, either in an exclusion or inclusion basis, and then apply the appropriate label based upon the criteria for each one of these. So obviously this is going to be a process going through your data. So where do you start? So this is part of it, is it can be daunting. I mean, if you have terabytes or petabytes of data sitting out there, it is a task that you look at and going, where do I begin? Well, the first thing I would recommend is going after a subset of the data and finding data that you know is going to have at least one match in each one of these particular labels, just so you know that your criteria is working. But then what I would also advise is the next step is to do an aging report on the files. And what that will give you is it's going to provide to you some insight as to what do I have out there as far as the age of the data. So if I go through and say, I want to create 10 buckets, which is what I did, 10 different age buckets, and you'll be seeing those shortly. And I want to just get an idea of what I have, because quite honestly, most users are hoarders like myself. I'm not excluded from that, I have to admit. And we put things out in the file share, for instance, and say, hey, I have great intentions for this, and then it lives there forever. That data is costing you money from a backup standpoint, from a management standpoint, what have you, in addition to the risk that you have from a business perspective of the mitigating all this sensitive data, as well as any of the other data sitting out there. The more data you have that's breachable, then obviously the bigger risk you have. So going after this content is something that you can do with this as well, with the age ranges. So we could go out and say, I want to look for keywords. I want to look for phrases, search expressions, which are full Boolean expressions with ands and ors, nots and nears and parentheses. They get very complex with that. Or you can use what I like to call the dark world of regex. If you ever use regex at all, regular expressions, it has a lot of power. It's been around for about 70 years, I believe. And this is how we can identify things that have patterns to them, like a social security number or a credit card. So first, let's go after the age range. Let's get an idea of what we have. After we do the classification, we get everything labeled. Now it's time to say, what do I have in my environment? Run that policy. So we've got a data governance policy that would go out and analyze the age range buckets. In fact, I'll just take you over to that now. And what this is going to do, and this is a little assessment that I did on our data. And what it did for me is it produced a report of those age range buckets. So now I have some insight. So if I'm trying to understand where do I begin on this, maybe I have an age. Now, if legal has come to you saying, this is the rule, this is all we're going to do, then that makes it really cut and dried for you. If you don't have that luxury of have somebody spelling out that rot policy and what is too old, then you have to make some of this analytical decisions yourself, of course. So I ran this policy, and what it did was it actually produced information both about rot as well as about the sensitive data that we found out within our test data. So once again, the good thing to do is to make sure that when you're nominating subsets of data, that you're going to have at least one file that's going to match everything you're looking for to ensure that criteria that you've established is viable, because that's the key. You don't want to be excluding anything, because in ROT, you want to make sure you process everything you want to include, but at the same time, exclude things that need to be. So you need to walk that fine line, and it will be an iterative process to go through all of this to be able to determine, pardon me, to be able to determine if your criteria is perfect in its assessment. Because if we go back, I'm going to jump back over to just talk about the classification real quick. Just keep in mind that if when you do the classification process on a subset of data, once you've done that subset of data, you never need to classify it again, because unless you have changed your criteria, added a label, or added new data, there's no reason to visit that data. But new data is deltas. So anything that's been added or modified, that's the data we would go after on a perpetual basis. But the legacy data, you would knock that out once and never have to look at it again. So the classification is a repetitive process, but on different sets of data each time. Okay, so what do we get from the buckets of data? Well, we're going to get, and I'm going to take you over to Power BI. And what I've done here is I ran a policy inside of Gimmal Discover that used a workflow which had the logic in it about what do I want to find. And what it did is produce a report. I then took that report, I exported it into a CSV format, and I ingested it into Power BI. For those of you who have never used Power BI, it is a very powerful product, analytical product from Microsoft. And one of the things it can ingest is a CSV file. So what we're seeing here, first off, let's start with the pie charts. So what we did is we went out and looked and saying, what sensitive data do I have? So using regular expressions, I was able to find credit cards and social security numbers within a total number of files that we had. So you'll see the percentages of each, a small percentage. Also looking for keywords. And this is where you can get, once again, the keywords or phrases, search expressions, or regex to be able to locate this data. Now, in this scenario, I actually said, hey, just because I find a file with a credit card doesn't mean it doesn't have the keyword. So all three checks are being done on the data as we're going through it. So sensitive data could have one match here, but each one of these could also be a match within this, because you want to make sure that you're finding all the data you have out there, not stop checking after you locate one. So these pie charts are representative of our sensitive data. And then if you look over here to the left, we have a lot of summary statistics. So we have the number of files, the number of image and text files comprising those, their total size, their average, their duplicates, which is the redundant portion of ROT. So I'll be addressing each one of those letters in ROT as we go through these reports. The number of extensions. So if we want to collect all the extensions sitting out there, we can certainly do that. And then you'll notice the statistics that we have for the sensitive data. How many files of each did we find, how big they are, and what's their average size. So that's the overall stats that this produced. But now I'm going to jump over to the created range. So this is going out, and you'll see the 10 different age buckets that I made, up to 20 years plus. And it's using the creation data, as you would suspect. The older data has less than the newer data does, because maybe you were actually, somebody was cleaning things up here. And it just gives you a nice bar chart of all that. And down below, you're going to see the age range buckets, and then breaking down by the number and also including the sensitive data. So roughly 3% of the data yet less than 1 year old contains credit cards. 4.25 has keywords, and a little bit shy of 2 has socials. So to be able to produce the statistical information. So I want to draw your attention to the 20 years. We got 6,000 files in 20 years plus that were created. Now, if I jump over using the modified date on that same subset of data, now we're going to see some different age range buckets. 55 of these, 5,500 that is, actually have a modification date greater than 20 years old. So we have data sitting out there, once again, the greatest intent by the users to store stuff, but there's a lot of dark data sitting out there in your environment, guaranteed. And trust me, you are not the only ones having the same issue. Everybody is. It's a tough thing to go through and keep this data clean, but it's a necessary task. Then if I go to the last access, Now let's go down and look at this one. 224 files were last accessed more than 20 years ago. So right now we know we got about 5,700 files sitting out there 20 years or older that have never been accessed basically since they were made. So there's a good chance that is truly part of your obsolete data. So all three of these, the creation, the modification, and the last access, are all part of the O in ROT for obsolete. So this is data that is outdated, that is no longer needed, that has no business value in the environment. So being able to go out and assign a particular bucket. So maybe we say, hey, anything 10 years or greater, we want to get rid of. So that gives you that insight on that. But keep in mind, what I did on this was anything that I found sensitive and that I put a classification label on is not included in this because I told the workflow to exclude anything that has one of those labels applied. That's where those labels come into play, is because now I exclude that from my processing because I have deemed that data worthy of keeping longer than the retention amount. If I go to extensions, and you'll see a list of extensions. Now, this is not just a list of extensions that I looked for. This is every extension that we found. So this list could be extensive, not to use a pun there. So this could be a very long list. I worked with somebody, they were doing an analysis of OneDrives for ROT, and they had over 5,000 different extensions of the files. Honestly, I didn't realize that many could exist, but a lot of them were date times that were created by software programs. That's why the varied extensions. But this list here is going to be full of every extension existing, not particular ones that we're looking for. Now, could you do that? Absolutely. You could certainly go out and go after particular ones. But look at this. Look at the AVI files and the MP3s. They have no sensitive or credit card, keyword, social security number data within them whatsoever. So most likely, these could be possibly your trivial data. Maybe these are things you no longer need. So we've covered the obsolete, we covered the trivial. Now let's go into the redundant. So on the duplicates page, what we have is the ability to say what two files have the exact same content. You'll notice down here with this little disclaimer. So what we do is we can produce a hash that is a 32-character hexadecimal number, and that represents the content and the content only of each one of these files. If we find two different files that have the same content, regardless of the file name, regardless of what folder they're in, we're going to deem them as duplicates. So what this means is that now we have roughly 13,000 duplicates sitting out here. So the duplicate processing is the last thing I recommend doing. So I'm going to go back. Let's talk about the process on how we want to do this because we're nearing our end here. So with the methodology that I would recommend is you go after and classify the data that you want to protect from the ROT remediation process. Then you do the obsolete data. Why obsolete? Because that's going to be the majority of your deletions that you're going to be doing during the remediation process is going to be that obsolete data. Once you have the obsolete done, then we go to the T for trivial. Go ahead and go after those particular extensions, or maybe you can do it by folder names. Trivial is actually the hardest thing. It's the most subjective as far as to be able to determine that. But those two things can help provide insight. And then lastly, go after redundant, because redundant would possibly be actually already addressed by cleaning up the obsolete. So getting rid of the obsolete first is the key. So we want to do a classification. We want to do the obsolete data, the trivial data, and then we go after the redundants. That is my presentation on sensitive data and ROT assessment.
Thanks,
Marcia,
Jeff.
back over to you.
Great job. Great job. Appreciate it. All good information. Hopefully a lot of takeaways from today. A reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to post that in the chat or the QA. There's a QA section on the Zoom now, whichever's easiest for you. And for future sessions too, as we're fine tuning these, please feel free to send any feedback, comments, suggestions. You can send them to me. My email address is on the PowerPoint here, marcia.shields@gimmal.com. But Jeff, I actually had a couple customers that submitted questions prior to the session. So I'll start with those unless anybody from the crew today has some questions. But the one that we received was, and we're asking is, do you see a correlation between email retention policies and file policies.
That's funny. Yeah, actually, I talk about this a lot during demos. It's very interesting, Marcia, because as you know, we've been helping configure software for the past 25 years that do email policy enforcement. And even though some users don't like it, it happens anyways. So email seems to be, okay, you know, whatever, sure, I'll lose my email after it reaches 90 days. I mean, we've seen some policies that are 90 days in the inbox and the message is deleted. It's just gone, except for those people on legal hold, of course. But you get to files and it seems to be much different. There's an emotional connection to files that I just don't understand. It would actually be a great thing for a behavioral scientist to actually do a study on, but people seem to be much more upset by having their files being deleted than they do their emails. I'm not quite sure of the emotional connection and why, but there is a correlation because honestly, they're both rot. It means when we were doing retention policy enforcement, that's basically getting rid of obsolete data. And the same thing would be true for files as well. It's just people sometimes aren't as happy about it. Now, if you have backing of legal or the executives, that's a whole different animal because obviously then you have to comply. But for somebody else to try to put that rule in, it's much more difficult, I'll be honest.
The other one that we had, knowing that we were talking about rot, it was kind of a general question, and I know you covered this on a lot, but what's your best advice for remediating rot?
Oh boy. I would say you need to make sure, just as I just said, you need to get executive or legal backing to be able to do that because, you know, they carry a big stick, so they can make sure that everybody's compliant and be prepared for user pushback because it is going to happen. You're going to have the business units, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but, you know, they're the ones that are making money for the company. Then they're going to say, hey, I need that data to be able to produce revenue, which could be a legitimate argument, honestly. But that would be the things I would say that you want to do. But when you're doing remediation of rot, I know I talked about the metadata, and those values are important, but content is the key. Because if you can identify the content, and actually with Gimmal Discover, we can even look inside of image files to be able to scrape text out of those looking for matches as well. That is the key to be able to do that. And that's not just for rot remediation. Having that classification of files can aid you in a whole bunch of other business processes.
We do have one live question here we just got. What method does Gimmal use to identify duplicates? And does it scan the content and identify true dupes or just look at file names or sizes?
Good question. So could we just do file names and sizes? Yes, we could. Now, if they get down to the byte, there's probably a good chance they're duplicates, but we typically do a hash, which produces a 32-character hexadecimal number that is referencing the content of the file itself. So regardless of its name, regardless of its location, if two files have the exact same content, they will be considered a match.
Another one, Jeff. Does Gimmal Discover work with structured data from Oracle or AWS, for example, transactional data?
It works with some structured data, but keep in mind we cannot remediate because due to structured data having a schema, then we would be creating orphans and divorces by deleting data out of structured environments. So can we identify files that are by their age or by their content? Absolutely. But we cannot take action on structured data.
And would this be supporting Oracle or AWS?
It would currently does, I'm not sure about AWS, but currently does do Oracle, also SQLs, databases, what have you. We can certainly get you the list if you need more information about that.
Right, that's a great idea. I think that's it for the questions. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. And thank you to everybody for attending today. Like I said, this was the first of many. We hope you enjoyed the session. We will be sending out the demonstration recording, so be on the lookout for that soon. Going forward in 2024, we plan to have these sessions twice per month. Variety of topics. And like I said earlier, if you have any topic suggestions for us that you would like us to cover, please do send those to us. We're always open for feedback. Our customers are the best people to get that from. Hold your calendars. So the next one is going to be January 16th, 2024, 1 p.m. Eastern again. It'll be a half-hour format like this. And there's also another email address if it's easier to remember. success@gimmal.com is also a place that you can send questions, comments, suggestions. But we thank you again, everybody, for joining. If we don't talk to you soon, have a great holiday. We'll see you real soon, though.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.